bad place to be in.
The Chicago 7 trials were the trials of 7 individuals that had created a great commotion in the riots for the Chicago Democratic National Convention in 1968. The Democratic Convention involved a large debate on determining a Democratic Party nominee that is supporting the Vietnam War to a member who was opposing the Vietnam War. Once Vice President Humphrey was elected, the people got so chaotic that he was intending to draw the Americans out of the Vietnam War. People then protested about this throughout the streets and parks. The government made an effort to try to authorize the people, but failed to do so. The police had a hard time taking the wrath of the people in the orders from the government. The riots made a great impact on Chicago history and gave a great representation of how our country shows that the power is to the people. The Chicago Democratic Convention is what caused the riots, protest movement, and the Chicago 7 trial. The Democratic Convention was to choose a nominee for a candidate for the Democratic Party. During this time, Vietnam was at war for being a communist country. The convention started with the election of Vice President Humphrey, who was pro-Vietnam War. The people were angry at the fact that Humphrey favored the Vietnam War. Humphrey supported the peace plank, which was able to take Americans out of Vietnam. People had different views than Humphrey about the Vietnam War. In a debate about the peace plank, nearly 3/4 of the people rejected the plank. Daley hosted a 1968 Democratic National Convention. Mayor Richard Daley tried to maintain order and law in the city. He also tried to keep the convention in Chicago by refusing permits for people to camp in city parks or in convention halls. Mayor Richard M. Daley delivered that message repeatedly Sunday to try to get rid of the protesters, but it wasn't effective. Daley was one of the few Democrats that believed in the voice of protest and was sometimes referred to as the boss. People couldn't stand to see others die. In 1963, there were about 17,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. By 1967, the number had increased to about 500,000 troops, and as the number of troops increased, so did the number of casualties. At the age of 18, young men from the U.S. had to register to be drafted into war. Those who supported the involvement of the U.S. in Vietnam were called hawks, but those who didn't were the ones who protested out in the streets. Protesters filled the streets to protest for the Vietnam War, racism, and for Humphrey. Some of these protesters were part of the Yippies, Youth International Party, also known as YIP, or Yippies, the Black Panthers, and the Students for a Democratic Society. Approximately 15,000 protesters gathered for a peaceful rally. Some burned their drafting card as a sign of disapproving of the government's orders. During World War II, the people put up middle and index fingers to signal a V for victory. During this time, the hand gesture would signal peace, and the people would use this hand gesture while rioting. After Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination on April 4, 1968, the people got even more enraged and increasingly violent. The policemen had a large job to handle by trying to control the riots, protesting movements, and to follow the government's rules. The Chicago 7 trial was the aftermath from 35th Chicago Democratic Convention in 1968. The Chicago 7 trial, sometimes known as the Chicago 8, focuses on the trials of 7 radical activists who were arrested for participating in the riots of the Democratic National Convention. The 8 protesters were Jerry Rubin, who was the founder of Youth International Party, Abbie Hoffman, Rennie Davis, John Froines, Tom Hayden, Lee Weiner, David Dellinger, and Bobby Seale. The 7 protesters were part of a rebellious group called the Yippies. Bobby Seale, on the other hand, was arrested for killing Alex Packley, a Panther recruit who was then subjected to 4 years of jail in mid-trial. The case was majorly between the battles of lawyers and Judge Julius Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman and 4 other defendants were convicted of some of the charges against them, which grew out of anti-war demonstrations at the Democratic National Convention in 1968. These 7 were one of the biggest protesters in the group. They were the ones who made speeches to motivate the riots to go against the government. They stuck to their beliefs on what were the rights that they needed the most, but that's what brought them into trouble with the government to have trials against them. The trials were getting very popular and took to the year 1969. Policemen had to deal with violent riots while following the rules of the government. Police and Illinois National Guardsmen wandered through the downtown area to manage the protesters. Sometimes, the more violent protesters would throw objects at them. This led to some of the policemen to attack by clubbing, spraying pepper spray, or by beating up hundreds of people, including news reporters, bystanders, peaceful protesters, and convention delegates. Ed Becht, a 27-year-old Chicago police officer during this time, said that he remembers the painful times during the riots. Becht was suspended without pay and had a harsh reputation for being charged on violating a newspaper photographer's rights, who was beaten late one night on the near North Side.